Sri Lanka is facing a deep crisis. Are the Rajapaksas solely responsible for this crisis?
Yes, I would blame the Rajapaksas solely for the crisis that we face in medium term and short term. But in the long term, I think every Sinhala leader who has led this country has played a part in using our diversity as the biggest weakness of Sri Lanka, where diversity should have been a strength. Violence broke out, and Gota Gogama protesters were attacked by state-sponsored terrorists. I'm emphasizing on that was state-sponsored terrorism. People like Johnson Fernando, people like Sanjeev Edirimana, people like Indika Anuruddha, who are current MPs who haven't still been arrested, were seen instigating violence.
It is clear that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa doesn't want to resign, as he has said so recently, and the main opposition refused to work with him, saying that they wouldn't really form a government or help in forming a government unless the president resigns. What do you think comes first, principles or the country?
That is, on principle, we can't work with crooks. You want to work with people who brought the Vandapottu, Vandapeti, all this hatred against Muslims and Tamils in this country. You want us to go and sit in the same ranks as people who are accused of murder, people who are accused of importing drugs. I mean, how does that work?
The current Sri Lankan crisis is unprecedented. Sri Lankans have never faced such desperate and difficult times. Our rulers, our leaders have mismanaged the country and the economy, and the people pay a heavy price. How will they be held accountable? In today's episode of Conversations with Alanki, I will be in conversation with a young, popular, and very vocal member of Parliament, Shanakiyan Rasamanickam. Welcome.
Hi, Alanki.
Thank you for saying yes for this second program. I thought, Mr. Rasamanickam, today's conversation, the focus of this conversation would be on the crisis, solutions you can put forward, and accountability. So as we begin this conversation, I'd like to know your views. Sri Lanka is facing a deep crisis. Are the Rajapaksas solely responsible for this crisis?
Good to be back on your show, Alanki, and I've been following your other programs as well, so you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
To be very honest with you, I think since Sri Lanka gained independence from the British, Sri Lanka has focused on the wrong things. The leaders have focused on the wrong things. If you start from, say, the plantation workers in the estates, the first thing that the first Prime Minister of Sri Lanka did was to make those citizens of Sri Lanka, not citizens of Sri Lanka, repatriate them back to India. I mean, those were the people who were earning Sri Lanka foreign revenue for decades, managing the estates with the tea and the coffee and the estates. Then if you look at it, we bring a Sinhala Only Act. We chase away all the Europeans from the country. And that's the Sinhala Only Act. That's another Prime Minister does it. Then if you look at it, you bring the standardization issue where, youngsters who've done so well in their academics do not enter the universities because they are disadvantaged based on the districts that they live in. They call it standardization, but it seemed to be targeting a certain group of individuals. And what happened? In all these three instances, the people who could have contributed to this country's economy left the country. And then if you look at the war in 1983 after the Black July riots, we had a huge outflow of quality people who left the country and settled in foreign countries. And so historically, if you look at it, Sri Lanka has always chosen, the leaders have always chosen to bring us down. And then in more recent times, definitely the Rajapakshas have to take majority of the blame, because for most of these debt that we have accumulated, they are solely responsible. If you look at the infrastructure projects that have taken place, the White Elephant projects, I mean, I'm sure people are sick of hearing all these things, but it's important to reiterate this point. I mean, if you look at the Hambantota Airport, Hambantota Harbour, Hambantota Convention Centre, Hambantota Stadium, highway to Hambantota, then a super fast railway track to Hambantota, all these infrastructure projects. I mean, yesterday at COPE, we figured out that some billions of rupees have been wasted just in maintaining the Hambantota Convention Centre, whereas the income out of it had been 15 million, like a fraction of the expenditure to maintain. So they're solely responsible for the high amount of debt that we have accumulated over the last 2 decades, I would say. But more so, even so recently, if you look at President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's election manifesto, Honorable Sumandran yesterday pointed out in Parliament, in his election manifesto itself, he has promised the country that he would give such significant tax cuts that Honorable Mangala Samaraveera, who was the then finance minister, had said that if those tax cuts are brought in, that Sri Lanka will be another Venezuela or another Lebanon. But which is what it is today. So, yes, I would blame the Rajapaksas solely for the crisis that we face in medium term and short term. But in the long term, I think every Sinhala leader who has led this country has played a part in using our diversity as the biggest weakness of Sri Lanka, where diversity should have been a strength.
And yes, I do agree, tax cuts, fertilizer bans, and unnecessary infrastructure projects, they all created this crisis. However, it's also important to note that Sri Lanka imports for $3 billion more than it exports. Don't you think the former government should have also restricted these imports and better managed the economy?
Well, I don't think a developing country or a country that is going to, be self-sufficient can ban imports. Imports are inevitable. But what we should have focused on is increasing our exports. I would say that we should have focused on increasing our export revenue.
Right.
However, we have failed to do that. And I see, for an example, when you build a port, such as the Hambantota port, where was the planning? The port should have surrounded itself with a number of large manufacturing facilities. If the Hambantota port was put up in Trincomalee, where we have a natural port, I mean, the cost of developing the port could have been used to encourage more people to focus on the manufacturing industry. If you look at the Hambantota airport, if we had developed the Jaffna Palali airport, we would have had such good connectivity with the with India, especially South India, that it could have boomed export revenue. It could have increased the ways of earning foreign currency. Let's say IT, India, South India, Chennai, Tamil Nadu is one of the states that is doing brilliantly in the entire Indian, all in amongst all the Indian states. Why? Because they focused on manufacturing and IT, and we could have, if we had the connectivity if we had developed the Palali airport. Unfortunately, during the Hapalne government, they started it, but they couldn't really get it to operating stage, to a sustainable operating stage, and now it has been abandoned again. I mean, if you look at the Talemana Rameshwaram ferry, that again brought connectivity. So connectivity to every single part of the country could have been one way that we increased our foreign exchange. I mean, rather than only focusing on restricting imports, because I don't think restricting imports is the way to go forward. It's about increasing our revenue from our exports. Now, that's why I initially said that putting everything in Hambantota. Now, I'm not against Hambantota. I'm not opposed to the people of Hambantota having good infrastructure. But see, if we had one highway to Hambantota, I think that's good enough. Or if we had a super fast railway track. But unfortunately, all of that has gone there. If we had connected the entire country to the capital, or if we had proper connectivity, I think we could have increased our export revenue. But did the previous government do enough? I have my reservations on that as well. That, like I said, successive governments have failed to look after the entire country, which is what has caused this crisis.
And do you think the opposition foresaw this crisis, the seriousness of this crisis? Because many of the opinion that the public was not really aware of what would fall upon them.
Well, Alanki, if you look at my parliament speeches and the speeches of my colleagues and many of the members of the main opposition party, we represent the Ilangai Thamarasu Katchi, the second largest party of the opposition, but the main opposition party, SJB, also, there are, I don't want to name any individuals, but there are many individuals who gave warnings, gave cautioning. But what did we see? We saw the then leader of, then chief government whip, Johnson Fernando, going out in a public rally in Anuradhapura, the SLPP's some propaganda campaign, and was making fun of the opposition MPs for saying that we are going to face a crisis. So people were given a sense of false security. When we said that there's going to be a fuel crisis, people were given a false sense of security, saying that everything was smooth, everything was in order. And it's very hard to blame the common, ordinary citizen to not be able to comprehend the gravity of the situation when it's spoken in parliament by the opposition MPs, because you had a parliament government which had 2/3 majority. So 150 plus people would articulate the fact that, that there is no crisis, whilst out of the 70 in the opposition, there are a few of us who were constantly telling the government that they need to look at restructuring the debt, start a dialogue with the IMF, keep our foreign reserves, let the control, they were keeping the dollar at 200 by artificially keeping that, to reassess all that, stop printing money, stop unnecessary infrastructure development work. There was some tar roads that were retarred, for no reason, just to appease the local constituency. So, I mean, we did speak out of the gravity. I mean, even if you look at our former finance committee chairman, Mr. Sumandiran, he headed a series of meetings where we even invited main government. There are 3 finance committees: the COPA, the Committee on Public Accounts, Committee on Public Enterprise, and the Committee on Public Finance. 3 chairpersons of those committees were also invited to these discussions, but I feel that they were also too scared to speak up in their group meetings, or even if they didn't come out in the open and warn the public. I think they should take the blame also, because while sitting in the government, while knowing that this crisis is going to be inevitable, and if they didn't know that, and if they were not able to grasp the situation, then they are not even fit to hold these positions.
And given the current situation, given the current crisis, what solutions can you suggest?
Well, Alanki, it's not an easy solution. I think the Prime Minister's proposed some new tax decisions. We welcome some of those tax decisions, even though they are very hard decisions. The corporate tax percentages have been increased, the VAT has been increased, pay has been made compulsory, concessionary taxes have been stopped for some of the industries. But these are things they're baby steps. It will take, the road to recovery is about 3 to 5 years. So from 2019 to 2022, right up until now, all those tax cuts that we had given, some people speculate that 33% of government's revenue was lost because of this tax cut. So if you add up the 2.5 years, that's almost 80% of 1 year Sri Lanka's entire revenue that we lost. So that deficit, we can't overly tax corporates, we can't overly tax individuals with inflation going so high. We can't tax them beyond a certain, a country can't tax certain beyond the level. If they do that, it's going to be even worse. So for us to manage the lost revenue, it will take us at least 3 years to balance it out. So for the next 3 years, we can't just patiently wait till it balances it out, but we have to be innovative and we have to do things. But to do all this, we need political stability first. With no political stability, we are not going to have any investor coming into Sri Lanka. We are not going to have any any tourism, even in the tourism industry. We are not going to have a boom in tourism till there's political stability, till we get rid of these diesel queues, till we get rid of these fuel queues, till we get rid of the shortages for gas for cooking, till we get rid of the electricity cuts. We are not going to have any tourists coming in the numbers that we could expect that will change the situation. So first of all, I think it's important that to have political stability doesn't mean that having political stability doesn't mean that there is a president, there is a prime minister, and there's a cabinet, and there are MPs, and the parliament has majority, the government has majority in parliament. It means that people of this country accept the current leadership, the people of this country accept the current government. But in today's context, I don't think anybody accepts this government as a legitimate government. So when that is the case, how would we attract investment? How would, even with the IMF, even if the International Monetary Fund, even if we were to go and get any assistance from them. Now, Ranil Wickremesinghe, when he was appointed as Prime Minister, every single person who thought that he would be able to bring about change are now disappointed, because people thought that Ranil was going to bring in, 1 billion from America, 1 billion from Japan, 1 billion from the UK, 1 billion from Canada. I'm just blurting out numbers, but there was a lot of expectations amongst the Ranil fans that, that he would, or even some people were just hopeful, that, okay, fine, let's give this guy a try. But what has he been able to achieve? It's almost been a month now, and he has just come on TV and in Parliament and just kept saying that it's going to get worse, it's going to be the hardest 3 months of our life. That's not what people expected from Ranil. So we expected that the IMF has an instrument called the Rapid Finance Instrument that can give a infusion of cash to the country. But for that to happen, we need political stability. They have clearly established that with no political stability, that there is no money coming in. So if with no money coming in from the IMF, there is no money coming in from any other place either. So which means we are stuck in this situation. So to do that, I mean, there are many other things that I can propose to you as solutions as to what we can do once we get our credit ratings back, once we have a program with the IMF, like many forms of investments that we can bring in. But to do all that, Gota must resign.
You were talking about political stability. Do you think the international community perceives the current government as being stable?
Well, I don't think the international community will comment. International community means, if you mean countries or heads of states or ambassadors, I don't think they would comment on how the situation is within a country, because that is not their task. But they would want to see Sri Lanka stable. But if I was to give you an answer to that, if they did see that political stability was there, I think the situation would be a lot more different. But I think most of the diplomatic community is happy that there is a current prime minister, because on the 9th of May, when violence broke out and Gota Gogama protesters were attacked by state-sponsored terrorists. I'm emphasizing on that was state-sponsored terrorism. People like Johnson Fernando, people like Sanjeev Edirimana, people like Indika Anuruddha, who are current MPs who haven't still been arrested, were seen instigating violence. They were seen promoting violence. They were seen to be spreading hate towards Maina Gogama and Gota Gogama protesters. And then the rest of it was history. People got attacked there, and the entire country was in a state of anarchy. And at that time, the military was on the streets. You saw people were struggling to find fuel, but there were tanks roaming around in Colombo, which is a very normal, common sight in the north and east, by the way. A lot of people in Colombo are very upset to see the military on the streets, but we have been saying this for decades now, that since the end of the war, we see military tanks on the road. But at that point, if the country had continued like that, I think a lot of them feared martial law, that that the military would take over and there would be no democratic government in the country. So then Ranil was appointed. So it's not, I don't think, this is my take on it. None of the diplomatic community have said anything to me. This is my view on it. This is how I look at it. Is that I think they must have thought, right, there is a democratic government. It's better than, going into a military rule. So I think I wouldn't be able to give you a yes or no answer about if they think there is stability, but I think all the reasons point towards no, that they don't think that there's a stable government.
And what do you suggest that the opposition parties do to help resolve the crisis? What is their role?
Alanki, the opposition is being blamed a lot. My party, we have 10 MPs, and the main opposition has about 45 plus MPs, I think. So the country gave 2/3 majority to the president, right? And then parliament is a system where it's a democratic system. People who have majority decide how proceedings are taken up. Even for an instance, if you look at the motion against the president, a displeasure, to move a motion to talk about the displeasure against the president was not even taken up by the parliament. And the reason for that is because majority of them are with the government. And those who are claiming to be independent, those who are trying to fool the public saying that they are not part of the government, are still speaking on the time allocated to them from the government and parliament. So I think the main opposition has put forward a bill, the 21st Amendment to the original 21st Amendment to the Constitution by Honorable Ranjit Madhum Bandara. That was taken up for first reading, and now it's ready for second reading. It has gone to Supreme Court. I think even to bring that to Parliament, the opposition can't do it because we only have a minority in the Parliament. So there is very little that the opposition can do, being in the current opposition. That is why a lot of people have said dissolve Parliament.
It is clear that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa doesn't want to resign, as he has said so recently. And the main opposition refused to work with him, saying that they wouldn't really form a government or help in forming a government unless the president resigns. What do you think comes first, principles or the country?
Well, country first, but also for the country to be first, you need to have principles. You can't have a country with flawed principles. I think the reason why TNA also is of the same position. Now, who do you think is responsible for this disastrous situation that the country is facing? That was one of the first questions you asked me. It's none other than President Gotabaya Rajapaksa.
Right.
Tax cuts, fertilizer. Let's not get into what the wrong things he's done. Let's not even talk about the 16,000 lives we've lost because of his mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's not even talk about the fertilizer container that was brought into Sri Lanka where People's Bank had to pay for rubbish. Let's not talk about Express Pearls compensation. Where is that? There's so many things that I can highlight, but people already know about these things. So with the 20th Amendment to the Constitution, President has taken over most of the power that Parliament had.
Right.
So if the opposition wanted to be part of any sort of government, which is headed by the man who is responsible for all these disastrous decisions, do you think it will be any better than it was a few days ago or a few months ago? So even if you were at school, if you've done, I mean, let's take a very basic example. While you've been at school, and I went to a private, semi-private school. So if you do something wrong in your class, you get punished, you get detention, you get detained. I mean, you have to stay back after class for a couple of hours to, whatever. So there has to be some sort of responsibility has to be.
And accountability.
Accountability is really important. So, and in this case, this is the lives of 22 million people that this guy has messed with. So how do we think that this guy is going to do the right thing now, tomorrow, once all the dust settles? Right now, people are getting used to this. People think that this is the new normal. People think waiting in queues is the new normal. People think spending more money for fuel is the new normal. It shouldn't be the case. Why should we have to pay for the mistakes of one single family? Why
Indeed.
does the entire country feel that, that all this stolen money, if it's brought back, we don't even need investments, So that is on principle, we can't work with crooks. You want to work with people who brought the Vandakottu, Vandapeti, all this hatred against Muslims and Tamils in this country. You want us to go and sit in the same ranks as people who are accused of murder, people who are accused of importing drugs. I mean, how does that work? I think for us to put the country forward, that first President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who's responsible, needs to be held accountable. Stolen money needs to come back. Do you think the same crooks who stole the money would allow any motion to be passed to bring back the stolen money? So how does that? I know a lot of people think about the country first, think about the economy first, put your political differences aside. But these political differences or the political decisions that they took, these people and the baggage that they come with is the reason why the country is in this state. There is no fixing the country with people like them.
And a few MPs like Harin Fernando and Manu Shanakara are of the opinion that they should leave party politics aside and help resolve the crisis. Even though they wanted the president to resign, they are now willing to work with him. What are your views on this?
I think I would reserve my comments on both Harin and Manoj. It's a disappointment, to be honest. But I mean, they seem to be justifying their decision. And let's give them some time and see. But I'd like to reserve my comments. But I'm a bit disappointed in the decision that both of them took.
Right. Moving on to the next question. You did talk about stolen corruption, stolen funds and assets. How do you think you could recover this? Is it possible to recover it? Because there's a lot of talk about recovering these stolen assets and funds.
Why don't we start with recovering the loans that have not been serviced in the last 5 years by individuals and corporates first? There's in rupees. Let's start that. Let's start there. Why don't we start with the state-owned enterprises that are making losses where clearly people have been robbing? Why don't we start with where the COPE committee, which I'm part of? COPE is just limited to just media buzz right now, I would say. At COPE, we ask people to come, we question them, we bring things out. Sometimes some of the things that we bring out are, I don't know if it's done by purpose or not. They don't seem to be, highlighted by any sort of, Parliament sitting proceedings are aired on Facebook through the Parliament Facebook page. I think COPE should as well. There'll be a lot of interesting things that people can pick out on. But, let's start there. And there are many ways to bring back stolen assets. Many countries have done that as well. And if not, we have to pass new laws in the country to make sure that those stolen assets are brought back.
So I'm going to put you on the spot now. Who, in your opinion, do you think is the best to lead the country right now?
I wouldn't give you a name.
Mm-hmm.
I would give you an ideal person based on principle. I would say somebody, first of all, needs to understand Sri Lanka is a diverse nation, diverse in terms of people, diverse in culture, diversity amongst religion, diversity amongst race, ethnicity, all that.
Indeed.
Somebody who accepts that Sri Lanka is, and somebody who is willing to lead all of these people. President Gotabaya Rajapaksha's first speech itself, he said that he was voted to office by the Sinhala people and that he was a president of the Sinhala people, but he will now lead everybody. That's number one, to not marginalize a certain community. And number two is to have principle, is to stand by what you say, is to not go behind positions when positions are just thrown at you. It's more important to have principle as to who you work with, who you don't work with. If you see right now, if somebody wants to, if Ranil, for instance, I think has no principle at all. Look at who he's working with. People who called him all sorts of names, and same goes to the other lot as well. People who accused Ranil of being the mastermind behind the central bond scam. How can they all sit together and now work together? They're just trying to sugarcoat it to the people, saying, "Oh, we are putting the country first." So I think, there are many other qualities that a leader should have. But I think, if these two, respect the diversity and then, have principle. When you say principle, it's comprehensive. It covers everything. Principle on all sorts of issues.
And moving on to the final question, many Sri Lankans are facing hardships. They're facing extreme poverty. How do you hope to use your position, your influence and platform to help and contribute?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to tell the people the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing that in the past. It's important to tell the people exactly what is happening in the country and to bring awareness amongst the people. People say put aside party politics, but then if the party that's in power is doing something that is disastrous, that's going to affect the lives of the people, I think it's my responsibility and the duty to say it out. A lot of people say, "Oh, you can only talk, you're just, we are not the ones who are in charge. And we don't want to be in charge when there is a corrupt, like I just mentioned, the reasons why don't we want to be part of any of this. And especially with the Tamil people, we have our own problems. The community, the Tamil people in the north and the east have been asking for devolution of powers, have been asking for political rights, for political power for decades now. And that hasn't been answered yet. And accountability for people who are enforced missing people who are in political prisoners, the government state-sponsored land grab. These things need to stop. I mean, I'm saying these out because any of my Tamil audience who voted for me, if they're watching it, they'd be like, "We voted for this guy, and he hasn't said a thing about us." But I mean, it is important for me to look into those aspects as well, because that is what the people elected me. But I am taking on more national issues also, whilst I'm looking at my regional issues. So I think right now the part that I can play is that, to bring awareness to the people about the real situation. And hopefully one day when, things do, I mean, when the fundamentals are addressed, when there's a president of the country who is willing to be inclusive, then we can contribute towards economy. Then we can contribute towards building up this economy. We can contribute towards bringing investment. I mean, think about the number of millions and millions of money that's available in the diaspora. I mean, like I told you at the beginning of the conversation, people who are chased away from this country from various reasons are now doing extremely well. I mean, thank God. I'm sure they're thanking God for, the government's disaster decisions, because that's why they got to leave the country, even though they would rather stay back at home. So right now, what we can do is, like I said, is to create awareness so that people don't get fooled a second time when, things like national security, in Sinhala apit inna ratak kone, these sort of sentiments are put forward. Sinhala Bauddha ratak, we have to protect Buddhism. Who is threatening Buddhism? Nobody is threatening Buddhism in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, who is threatening any Sinhala people? Nobody's threatening them. They're just creating a boogeyman of non-existent threat to get votes. So that people don't fall again for that trap, I think is my primary responsibility by creating awareness.
All right, we have come to the end of this conversation. Thank you so much, Mr. Rasamanickam. Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Alanki, for having me on the show, and good luck with everything that you do. And to the country, I would say it's a difficult time, and good things come out of a crisis situation. Let's all get together and chase Gota away, and then let's work towards our future together. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope all of you enjoyed watching this conversation. I will be back with another episode. Until then, stay safe, God bless, and take care.